When pictures of this strange, low-slung, rocket-like motorcycle appear online, they always spark confusion. People stare at it, a 13-foot steel monster with the rider sitting behind the rear wheel, and wonder, what on earth is that thing? Most just assume it's some kind of drag racing relic. But the truth? It's so much more. This isn't just another bike. It's a scientific experiment, a machine 20 years ahead of its time. A creation born from the mind of one brilliant British engineer named Drag-Waye, a man who blended missile technology, mechanical genius, and pure courage to build something the world had never seen. This is the unbelievable story of the Drag-Waye, the world's first slingshot motorcycle. The man behind the machine. Drag-Waye was born in England in 1933, an engineer, inventor, and absolute motorcycle fanatic. Not much is known about his early childhood, but by his late teens his passion was clear. At just 18 he was already entering the Pioneer Run, a 44-mile event for motorcycles built before 1915. Slow, ancient machines chugging along at barely 15 miles an hour. By 21, Clive was serving as a wireless operator in the Royal Air Force, working with radios on the ground, and sometimes in aircraft. That job had an unusual twist. In combat flights, the wireless operator was also the plane's machine gunner. Imagine that. Tuning radios one moment, defending the aircraft the next. After his service, Clive attended college and graduated as an electrical engineer. He joined de Havilland, one of Britain's major aerospace companies, the people building missiles and space systems. In other words, he wasn't just a tinkerer, he was a real scientist. But his heart never left motorcycles. In 1959, he was still competing in vintage runs, riding his favorite 1904 BAT, a bike whose name fittingly meant best after test. However, somewhere deep inside, the man who loved old motorcycles started dreaming about something very new, something wild. The dream. In 1959, Britain, there was no such thing as a drag strip. The country had sprint racing, single-vehicle time trials over short distances, but not the kind of head-to-head drag racing that was booming in America. Yet Clive became fascinated by it. He started sketching ideas for a motorcycle that could blow past anything on two wheels, not just in England, but the entire world. There was one small problem. In post-war Britain, there were no cheap speed parts, no big American V8 engines, and no racetracks made for this kind of thing. But that didn't stop Drag-Waye. Using his engineering background and a little help from two friends, Howard German and John Westby, he began building a prototype in his small home workshop near Welwyn, England. Their tools? Basic. Their resources? Almost nothing. Their vision? Decades ahead of its time. The result? A crude machine built from iron water pipe, powered by a 14-horsepower Norton 16H engine. The frame was over 10 feet long, and the rider's position? Behind the rear tire, inspired by American slingshot dragsters. Howard German, Clive's close friend, was brave enough to test it. The bike never went faster than 50 miles per hour, probably on purpose, but it worked. The concept was proven. The year was 1961, and a new era of motorcycle engineering had quietly begun in a tiny British shed. The creation of the Drag-Waye. By 1964, Clive and his small team had spent 3 years working in total secrecy. When the world finally saw what they had built, it looked like something from a science fiction film. They called it the Drag-Waye. At 13 feet long, this machine looked impossible. It had a Volkswagen flat-4 engine, a supercharger, a 4-speed transmission, and the rider literally sat behind the rear wheel. It was, without question, the world's first slingshot motorcycle. But here's where it gets truly mind-blowing. Clive didn't just build a bike, he built a data system. Inside a small box mounted at the front of the machine was a real-time data logger, capable of recording acceleration every tenth of a second. It even had a mechanical G-meter with a weighted pen that drew graphs as the bike ran down the track. Think about that. In 1964, before computers, before digital sensors, Drag-Waye had onboard telemetry. While racers of his time were tuning by ear and instinct, Clive was literally analyzing G-force curves. This was the birth of data-driven racing. But the engineering genius didn't stop there. The top frame rails were sealed and pressurized to 50 pounds per square inch. They actually doubled as an air tank to feed the fuel system. He even designed the world's first form-fitted fiberglass racing seat, molded to the rider's body. Painful process included. Every inch of this bike screamed brilliance. Every nut, wire, and weld carried the fingerprints of a man who thought about physics, not just horsepower. The debut disaster. The Drag-Waye made its public debut at a legendary event, the 1964 British Drag Racing Association International Drag Fest. This was the moment British drag racing truly began. The event was huge, backed by the famous racer Sidney Allard and supported by Wally Parks, the founder of America's NHRA. Thousands came to see the American dragsters and the best British bikes in action. And in the middle of it all, rolling out of the paddock like something from another planet, was the Drag-Waye. On its very first run, tragedy struck. The Volkswagen engine, a small 1.45-liter, supercharged to the moon, was running 20 pounds of boost. It could only handle 5. The connecting rods folded, the crankshaft shattered, and the engine exploded in spectacular fashion. Shrapnel everywhere. The crowd was stunned. But Clive and his team didn't quit. They rebuilt it almost immediately, this time with a smaller 980 cubic centimeter setup. And the Drag-Waye roared again. It hit 117 miles per hour in the quarter mile. It wasn't the fastest, but it was something completely new, and the world noticed. Evolution and perfection. After 1964, Clive went back to work. He refined everything. Lighter tubing, simpler construction, even removing rear suspension to save weight. The Mark II Drag-Waye was 100 pounds lighter, a foot shorter, and finally, fast. But the real performance came with a new rider, Dave Loke. Howard German had retired, and Dave stepped in, only to discover one hilarious problem. The seat had been molded to fit Howard's body. Exactly. So Dave had a bold idea: move the controls forward and sit directly on top of the rear tire. Crazy? Absolutely. But it worked. They converted the Drag-Waye into a direct drive monster. No gearbox, no clutch, just pure power to the tire. The results were stunning. Quarter-mile times dropped from 11 seconds into the tens, and then in 1969, into the 9-second zone. At the Elvington RAF base, the Drag-Waye set a world record, a 9.75 second quarter mile at 150 miles per hour. It became the fastest British motorcycle of its kind, and one of the most innovative ever built. The legacy continues through the 1970s. The Drag-Waye kept racing, setting records in sprint events and astonishing everyone who saw it. By 1982, nearly 20 years after its debut, it was still running. Now ridden by Brian Jones, it set a standing kilometer record at 22.37 seconds. Eventually, the old beast was retired, too heavy and too radical for modern racing, but far too important to ever be forgotten. Meanwhile, Clive Way moved to California. There he started a company called Weberman with his friend Gary Pedd, selling induction systems and performance parts. The business became so successful it was later acquired by Borla, forming the foundation of Borla Induction, which still exists today. Sadly, Clive Way passed away in 2000 at just 67 years old. But his invention, his masterpiece, survived him. The Drag-Waye was lovingly restored and still appears at nostalgia drag racing events in England. Crowds gather around it, stunned, curious, amazed. Some just stare at its bizarre shape. Others whisper about the kind of courage it took to ride it. And everyone walks away in awe of what one brilliant engineer built in his shed half a century ago. The Drag-Waye isn't just a motorcycle. It's a time capsule, a piece of engineering that predicted the future. Clive Way wasn't trying to get rich or famous. He was chasing knowledge. He wanted to see how far science could take speed. And he proved that intelligence and creativity could push beyond limits. It's a reminder that sometimes the most incredible innovations don't come from big factories or famous brands. They come from a few determined people, a few good ideas, and a lot of passion. So next time you see that photo online of that impossibly long bike with the rider sitting behind the wheel, you'll know the truth. It wasn't a gimmick, it was genius. The Drag-Waye. A motorcycle so far ahead of its time, it still looks like the future. If you love this story and want more incredible tales of forgotten machines, bold inventors, and pure speed, hit subscribe, tap the bell icon, and join our community of gearheads who love the strange and the extraordinary. I'm Kurum, and this was the untold story of the Drag-Waye, the world's first slingshot motorcycle. Until next time, keep your engines loud, your ideas louder, and never stop chasing what's possible.